the best-selling author, senior reporter, writer at Newsweek, contributing editor of Vanity Fair, previously senior writer at the New York Times for 2 decades, where he was a 2-time finalist for Pulitzer Prize. His latest book is A Mind Unraveled, a memoir. Kurt Eichenwald with a K, K-U-R-T, Eichenwald.com is his website. You could tweet him at Kurt Eichenwald. Kurt, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Great to see you again. It's been a while since you've been on the show. You put together this amazing Twitter stream about what the deal is with Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. And it's a complete reframe that I think nobody gets. And, you know, I mean, up until I read your Twitter feed, I was just running on the assumption, which is basically kind of the Democratic Party position by and large, that, you know, Hunter Biden is like Billy Carter. You know, that, you know, or Rodham,
he'll have his own beer.
Yeah,
soon.
Or Hugh Rodham, you know, Hillary Clinton's brother. That, you know, he's just, you know, the black sheep of the family kind of thing. But you've got a different story here that I find absolutely fascinating. Tell me about this.
Well, the primary thing here is the essence of the quote unquote scandal is the departure of the prosecutor general of the Ukraine, Viktor Shokin. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, you know, they make it out to be this ridiculous conspiracy theory that Joe Biden said in December of 2015, you know, if you don't get rid of this guy who is blocking the attempts to solve corruption in Ukraine, if you don't get rid of this guy, we are not going to guarantee your loans for $1 billion. And then what happens promptly is absolutely nothing. And it is not until months later when the economics minister of Ukraine resigns, saying Shokin is corrupt.
Shokin, the prosecutor.
Yeah. And then that is followed by the International Monetary Fund saying we are going to withhold $48 billion unless, that we have committed to you unless something is done about this corrupt guy. Then his deputy resigns saying he is corrupt, and it's the next day. You know, this all takes place in a week. It's the next day that he resigns.
So none of this had to do with Joe Biden. This
nothing.
Was the IMF and
nothing. I mean, you had the IMF, you had the European Union, you had Western investors, you did have the United States, you had the IMF. All of them going, this man is blocking all of the attempts to solve the corruption problem. He's blocking the formation of the group that is supposed to be focused on Ukrainian corruption. All of this is being stopped by this one man, and you've got to get him out of the way, because one of the things was that all of the money that was being pledged by all of these different groups was based on Ukraine pulling itself out of intense corruption that has been undermining the government, and that in the end was going to make them more susceptible to infiltration by the Russians. And so everybody wanted to give them money as sort of a counterbalance to Russia. And when they saw that Viktor Shokin was making it stop, they all pulled their money back and saying, you're not fighting corruption because of this guy.
So Trump is running an ad right now, the Trump re-election campaign. They just did a $10 million media buy. And they're running an ad where they've got Biden saying, you know, I told him if he didn't get rid of that prosecutor, I'd pull the $1 billion. And son of a gun, a little stronger word, but, you know, son of a gun, they fired him.
And that is a complete falsehood.
Right. So number one, yeah. So
he didn't help himself.
So Biden was claiming credit for something that he didn't do. Number one. Number two, though, the allegation being made in the Trump ad is that Biden was doing this because Shokin, this prosecutor who was fired, was investigating Biden's son and Biden's son's company.
Totally false.
So tell me about that.
Biden was brought on to a company. Suddenly, the name drops out of my head. An oil and gas company in Ukraine that was founded by a gentleman who was
Burisma.
Yes, that's the name of the company. And that was founded by a man who formerly was in the government. He was being investigated for taking bribes, money laundering, and tax evasion from what he did in 2012.
This is before Hunter Biden.
This is before Hunter Biden. And the investigation, the British got involved in that investigation because some of his money went there. And the entity that he utilized, that he was alleged to have utilized, was an investment fund that had as one of its investments Burisma. And so ultimately what you're talking about is this quote-unquote Hunter Biden scandal is actually an investigation of a guy who was a government official for his actions as a government official, who had a fund, and he is accused of having used that fund to launder money out of the United States. Notice Burisma isn't in it at all. And the idea that the directors, let's talk about the directors who joined with Hunter Biden. It includes...
Now, hang on just a second. Just to boil this down into simple English, the company itself was corrupt. Mm-hmm. The new government came in, and when the prosecutor left, basically the government said, we're going to clean all this stuff up, including this company.
Well, no, that was already happening.
Okay, so...
it wasn't a company. It was this guy.
Okay,
here's the way to think of it. It's very simple. It is as if... Bill Gates was under criminal investigation for for money laundering and tax fraud from a time when he served in the government. Let's pretend that. And so what they are claiming is that a member of the board of Microsoft is under criminal investigation because Bill Gates is under criminal investigation for what he did when he was a government official. It has no connection.
All right. So the company was trying to clean up itself and its image, and so they invited some squeaky clean guys onto their board.
Yeah.
And so again, one of those guys was Hunter Biden, the son of the vice president. Who were the other people?
The former president of Poland, and
who was not a corrupt guy.
No. And the former head of the counterterrorism center at the CIA under George W. Bush.
Is that Black? Was his name?
It was Cofer Black. And so, you had these. Now, why Hunter Biden? The idea is, Hunter Biden is this nobody. No, in fact, Hunter Biden was their lawyer. Hunter Biden was part of a very prominent law firm, David Boies' law firm, called Boies Schiller. And Boies Schiller...
It's a D.C.-based law firm.
D.C.-based law firm, very big, very prominent. And Hunter Biden was assigned to represent Burisma. And part of the element that Boies Schiller had as them being... their representative is they had to have a role in helping to clean up, helping to observe, and so Hunter Biden was put on the board. So you look at this, it's all standard. Now, do I think Hunter Biden should have been on that board? Probably not. But ultimately,
because of the optics, not because
of the optics. Yeah. Because of the optics, and it's not a surprise when you think about it. These are all events from the distant past, and everybody knew that these events had taken place. And suddenly, Joe Biden is leading the polls, and shock! It's a scandal. It's one of the ridiculous things. And as soon as somebody else is leading in the polls, there'll be some new scandal.
They're working. They've got the Bernie scandals, right? Oh, my God, he honeymooned in Russia or something like that. And now they're digging up the ones on Elizabeth Warren. I guarantee you.
Yeah, and what's wrong with that? I don't care about opposition research paid for by the campaign. What is terrible about this and is new about this over the last 8 years is that the GOP is using government for opposition research. It is, I mean, if you go back, Benghazi, what was the scandal there? They never said. They just said Benghazi.
I think the scandal was actually that the State Department had come to Congress and said, we need money to harden some of our facilities, including the CIA station, or the State Department station, but the CIA was using it, at Benghazi. And the Republican-controlled Congress said, no, we won't give you the additional money. That happened three or 4 years before Benghazi. That was the real scandal.
But you look at it, and it's like there was a terrorist attack on a State Department facility. Guess what? That happens. That happens a lot.
It happened like 5 or 6 times during the Bush administration.
Yeah,
and George W. Bush.
People want to say, when you say, what's the scandal? Their response is, people died. I was like, yes. What's the scandal? People die in the Middle East in war-torn countries.
Well, the allegation that they made was that Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, had somehow directed the somebody to stand down and not rescue these guys.
Yeah,
I mean, this is just whole cloth.
It's just made up. I mean, if you go back and look at it, the scandal. This happened on September 11th of 2012. And the scandal, quote unquote, was the scandal was the Obama scandal up until he won re-election. And as soon as he won re-election, it became the Hillary scandal, because now she was the next.
I had forgotten that.
Yeah,
I had completely forgotten.
And if Hillary had moved aside, they would have totally blocked. They would have dropped Benghazi, and they would have started running hearings on whoever was leading in the polls at that point. I mean, this is one of the problems, and this is how they got themselves where they are. One of the problems with the GOP is that they cannot anymore run on ideas. What are their ideas? Tax cuts, we hate homosexuals, but no, we really don't, but we'll say we do until we're, away from people who hate homosexuals. And what else? Deregulation. Okay, how many times can you say this?
Muslims.
Yeah, Muslims. So it's
black people, Hispanics.
Yeah. So it's hate and let's make the rich richer. Those are not ideas. So what do they have left? They have, let's make the Democrats out to be
as corrupt as we are.
As corrupt as we are. And let's just make stuff up. And and this is what's wrong for someone like me, is that I dig into the facts. I dig into what are the regulations surrounding the use of private email servers in the State Department pre-2013. And one of the things people don't know, when the New York Times started getting challenged on that, they cited something in the Federal Register, but apparently they didn't read it, because I went and looked at it and wrote an article saying it says the opposite of what they claim. It says, if you're using a private server, here's what you need to do. It's like, well, this obviously allows it.
So Hillary Clinton
didn't do anything wrong.
Does that mean that apparently Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump are using a private server?
Yeah, and so did
Is that okay?
Well, no, the rules changed in 2013. But if you want to go back,
are breaking the law.
If you want to go back in time, yes, Hillary had a private server. You know what Colin Powell used for his private emails within the State Department?
It was AOL.
It was AOL.
Yeah.
It was an AOL plugged into the wall of his office on a laptop.
Kurt Eichenwald, you were about to say what really upsets you about all this.
What happens is that the Republicans go off and they start making an argument, and they feed it through Fox News, and they feed it through the bubble, and eventually what happens is that the political reporters pick it up. And, when you stand back, when someone like me comes along and says, no, let's talk about it, it takes a lot of information to say this is nonsense. But a lot of the reporters are just doing the, Congressman X says why. And the response is this. And it's like, why don't you look into what why is? Why don't you check the regulation? Why don't you find out the history of Ukraine? Why don't you find out who this prosecutor was and what I mean, does anyone really believe that Joe Biden walked in and said, you know, we're going to withhold $1 billion loan guarantee when Ukraine was getting $48 billion from the IMF, and they say, oh, we're going to start firing people. And, you know, they don't know that his deputy resigned. They don't know that the IMF was even giving any money. They don't know about the EU giving any money. They don't know the basics of any of these scandals. And they keep perpetuating them. And, you know, the end point is any time someone says this, some Republican says this, there needs to be the response. There needs to be the question of, so you don't think that the resignation of his deputy the day before he resigned, you know, where he accused him on national television of corruption, do you think that had nothing to do with it? Do you think that the IMF, you know, the IMF threatened to withhold $48 billion for the same reason?
Isn't the bigger lesson here that every time the Republican Party or individual Republicans get away with these lies, and we've seen this, by the way, we also see this in social issues. You see this, you know, I mean, going back to Reagan's stuff around AIDS, you see this around some of the abortion debates, you see this around some of the birth control debate. I mean, they just literally make stuff up. Mm-hmm. And, you know, oh, yeah, you know, killing babies after they're born. You know, infanticide. They're now passing laws against infanticide. Nobody's practicing infanticide. And the more they get away with it, the more they do it. And it's this both sidesism in the media.
And what it is the corruption of America by Fox News. Republicans know they can literally say anything. Did
you see Kevin Rudd's piece in the Sydney Morning Herald?
No.
This is maybe 8-10 months ago, maybe a year ago. He wrote Kevin Rudd is the former Prime Minister of Australia, the last relatively progressive Prime Minister of Australia, as far as I know. And he wrote an op-ed titled, "Rupert Murdoch is the cancer at the heart of Australian democracy."
Yeah.
And he documents this in this op-ed. It's you know, maybe 2,000 words. And he goes into how Murdoch took over the media in Australia, how Murdoch now owns more than 50% of all the media in Australia, or the print media. Then he went to the UK and he took over and he corrupted the government in Australia. Then he went to the UK and corrupted the government there. And then he came to the US and corrupted the government here. And it's a mind-boggling, you know, via Fox News, it's a mind-boggling piece. I strongly recommend it to you. Kurt, we've been talking about, just a moment ago, we were talking about how Fox News seems to be at the core of so much of this stuff. It's the place where the poison begins. There was an interesting op-ed a couple of days ago, I'm trying to remember who wrote it, suggesting that really the Murdoch family holds the fate and future of the United States in their hands. Rupert has turned over to his son Lachlan apparently most of the control of Fox News, and nobody quite knows which direction he's going to go. Lachlan's brother is fairly progressive, or at least his wife is outspokenly progressive. Lachlan himself appears to be more of kind of an old school conservative, but not a crazed reactionary like his father, Rupert. Any sense of where this is all going? We're seeing Fox News right now break into open conflict on the air, you know, between the reporters like Shep Smith and Chris Wallace and the primetime talent like Sean Hannity.
I don't think anything's going to change. And one of the reasons is that literally they have crazy people in their primetime episodes.
Are they crazy people, or are they people who have figured out that with this story we can grab viewers and make a hell of a lot of money?
No, I've debated this in my head for a long time. Take Sean Hannity. Is he crazy or does he believe it? And you know, if you go back and you look, there was that filing.
Or is he just a cynical, you know?
No, he's crazy. When you go back and you look at his text messages with Paul Manafort, and those were filed in court, he is sitting there talking about the deep state, which is something they made up when Trump became president. And he literally believes that there is some vast conspiracy. I mean, there's no difference between what he believes and what Joe McCarthy was pushing. You know, I have in my hand the names of 57 communists in the State Department.
And it turned out it was a piece of paper that had no such list.
Yeah, and ultimately what Sean Hannity had done is that he believes his own garbage. And when you have that kind of person pushing stuff out, the Republican Party knowing they can say anything and it will get pushed out. And then they had the big mistake, the big problem is that they elected someone who was too dumb to know that it was all a scam. And so he set off, you know, other governments and his own people to go chase down the conspiracy theories, which is, you know, it is the ultimate endpoint here.
Right. You're supposed to promote the conspiracy theories, bring in the rubes, bring in the money, but you don't actually dig deep into them because once you do, they're going to fall apart. But that's what Bill Barr is doing right now. And, you know, in my new book, I've got on page 118, I think it starts, 4 pages about how Bill Barr shut down the Iran-Contra investigation. The same way, by pardoning Ollie North and Elliot Abrams and 5 other people, Casper Weinberger. You know, Lawrence Walsh went nuts, screaming headline in the New York Times and Christmas Eve 1992. You know, Attorney General Bill Barr covers up. You know, I mean, Lawrence Walsh was crazed by this. So you've got all this stuff going on, and now you've got Barr now trying to discredit not just, you know, the current scandal that has to do with Ukraine. You've got him trying to discredit the Mueller investigation.
Which I don't understand why people aren't going more nuts about that. Mueller indicted or got guilty pleas from 37 people and organizations.
Right.
That's a waste of time. And in terms of them saying, oh, it wasn't Russia, it was Ukraine, you have Sweden saying it was Russia, you have Britain saying it was Russia.
Israel saying, I mean, everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah. Kurt Eichenwald. Kurt, thanks so much for dropping by. Great having you in the studio. We'll be back.